Jordan. I'm a curator for JTR Presents, and I have the privilege and pleasure of talking to Johan Astratha Eskew. Johan, thank you so much for being here. It's definitely a treat to have you as a part of this project.
No problem.
So,
No problem.
yeah, so About Dual Diagnosis is an exhibit in partnership with Champ and Dawn's Alzheimer's research project. Um, when I was first brought on to this project and we were brainstorming what this would be, I remember them mentioning like it's for a conference and like a big part of the conversation is going to be around mental health, especially for men of color. And so when I started thinking about artists, long story short, I thought about William Paul Thomas. I thought about Karrington Gardner, thought about Marion Tisdale. And then I shared with you about it. And when you had shown me the video Semicolon, which is, we'll get into that a little bit later, it just made sense. It tied into everything I talked about the other artists because the more I think about this project, the more I thought about this project, the more I've been doing the research into it, it all seemed to be rooted around the importance, for, especially for Black men, to be able to talk about mental health, to talk about trauma, talk about healing, and just having a space and experience to do that. And each artist has a different avenue to say about it. So with yours, it was specifically profound because Semicolon is this narrative from someone who is a survivor of an action that he survived through, and I think there's an intense strength and power in being able to talk about that openly. And so, getting into all of that, I just want to get into the first question: how does your work touch on the subjects of mental health?
The way that my work touches on the subject of mental health is more of a source of inspiration and I'll say a talking point to where you look at it and it's supposed to inspire certain questions and thought processes about mental health to get the conversation going on, what's going on. Can I talk about it? Yes, I can. And not being as taboo of a subject anymore. Because that's the point of why I make work that relates to mental health, is because it's something that this should not be taboo to talk about.
All right. And definitely see that through Semicolon. And so in general, because you've made and are still making several films for a filmmaker that touch on all kinds of topics. So I guess what inspires you to make this work in particular?
I think it's about the what if visually and how that formulates in my mind. Because I'm a what if type of artist, I like to describe it, where I'll have an idea of like, what if this and this, what if that and that, or what if we see this mixed with that? And how can I use that in order to stimulate a thought process within who's looking at it and get them to think more deeply about the subject matter itself.
So that's brilliant. That is what I experienced watching Semicolon. And forgive me, I forgot the gentleman's name, but it felt like a meditation, if you will. Like listening to his words, listening to him kind of open up about his thoughts, feelings, reminisce on what I understood to be potentially the cause of his attempt, which seemed to be the loss of a love. And there was this striking visual of looking at him with what looks like either cuts or his lips were sewn in some way. Like there's these like straight lines that are like very pronounced against his lips. If you're comfortable, I'd like to explore that together.
Mhm.
Can you share more about that? Can you just share more about that?
Yes. For that was a creative choice about him having his mouth sewn shut, with the idea that people, black males, people of color, males in general, don't feel they have the freedom to talk about what's wrong, what's bothering them, their mental health, issues that they're going through. It's kind of this almost this unspoken rule of you have to just take it on the chin and move forward. You're not allowed to speak about, how you feel. And that is the thing that I think is hurting people the most. Is because you might feel something, you need to talk about something, you need to express yourself, to someone, but not feel comfortable enough to do it. And then holding that in, figuratively being made mute is what causes people to make dangerous decisions. So seeing that visually, I think was helping to tell the story of, you know, not saying it, but thinking it.
Could My last thoughts and question of it, because again, the film feels very meditative. I feel like it's something each person should kind of watch and then just kind of think rhetorically upon. And so I say that to say one of the sort of questions that stayed with me as I thought about it was, I wonder if the level of catharsis, if there was a catharsis for the narrator, I guess, was that impactful after the making of the film? Or wasn't it? I mean, I don't know him, but from what was shared, it seems, I'd imagine that there was something profound that happened to him afterwards in a more positive way. I'd like to think that.
This film itself was a bit of a unusual but unusual experience, but in a very good way. Because for this project, I had to pitch it, and through the pitching process where I developed my team, I initially had a little bit of a challenge because some people didn't want to participate with it because they thought it was going to be a depressing process. However, the process of making it was a very loving, uplifting process. But I think it's because we all was uniting with the reason why it was being made. Because I remember very clearly on the film shoot, we were having fun, we were joking around, we were enjoying ourselves. It was a very unified experience. But I think it's because we were unifying behind why it was being made. So I think it did have a impact on all of us, and a unifying. I think it just had a really good impact on us because we were working towards something bigger than ourselves.
Oh, that's beautiful. Is that a common experience or practice specifically with you with your work as you make films?
With films, yes. I'm very picky about the team that I work with, and it's more about the vibe and the skills. If they have the skill, I usually go to people who specifically have the certain skills that I'm looking for in order to build my idea uniquely to itself. And then I gauge the vibe that I have with those certain people to then see, can we work together and enjoy working together, rather than, they're the best cinematographer, but they are terrible to work with. I'd rather work with somebody who's a little bit less talented, but I can work with them because I will be able to bring the best out of them. They'll be able to bring the best out of me, rather than being someone who might be a little bit more egotistical, but they have really good work on paper. But then that might bring down the project because of a lack of agreement between the team.
Mm, that makes sense. It reminds me of there was another filmmaker that was like, I think he was getting his master's or a doctorate at UNCG in film. And I remember this is back when I was working at the artist block, and we had this debate about filmmaking as either an art form or a collaboration. And I
Mm,
was like, why do we need to choose either or? It could be both. But if I have to pick one, I would say it's an art form before anything
mm,
else. And I think he was going with the argument that it's a production, it's a collaboration, it's literally just people coming together. And to him, that was the root of it. The the way we were communicating, I don't think it came across that. But after
ah,
giving it much thought, I still think about that periodically. And so when talking to you and hearing about your movie ideas and even some of the things that we've done personally, like
yeah.
reading about your script and talking about, scenario writing and how to move the plot along and some of the gems that you've dropped for me to pick up. I
Hmm.
see, I feel like I see more and more of his point, but I say all that because I think it's a good point to end on, you know, what is your experience in the process of healing and in the process of storytelling as a collaboration? What would you say about that? What would you share about that?
I when with all that, I think that the art form drives us. The collaboration is the execution, especially when it comes to team sport art. Which never thought put those words together before, but I think that's what filmmaking is. It's a team sport art form where you have a
Mm,
specific vision from a specific person or people. Depending if it's the producer that's doing it, the director, or the director that goes to the producer goes to the director. You have a specific vision that you're going for, and then you put together the team to make that vision come to life. And I believe it's a collaborative effort towards a specific vision. And how you put together that team is how you essentially see it all come to life. And if the artist's vision comes to fruition. There we go.
I appreciate that. Again, thank you so much for your time. It's an honor to have you as a part of this project and to work with you about it. And just thank you for your words of wisdom.
Thank you.
Hi, welcome for anyone watching. My name is Jordan. I am a curator for JTR Presents. I have the pleasure and privilege of speaking with Karrington Gardner here, who is part of our exhibit known as Dual Diagnosis. So for Dual Diagnosis, it is an exhibition, both virtual and physical, that showcases the work of 4 North Carolina artists, and who each of them have profound works touching on very important subjects. So today we'll be talking with Karrington particularly about safe spaces. In this exhibit, it's primarily focused about access to mental health and mental health topics relating to men of color, particularly Black men. And one of the interesting things that we came across in our earlier conversations is this idea of building space.
Mhm.
And so, first and foremost, Carrington, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure.
Yeah, anytime. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, when at the start of this exhibition, when I started thinking about it, I was already thinking about what artists are doing cool stuff related to the topic of mental health. And so
Mhm.
I actually spoke with William Paul Thomas, who, because I think you're familiar with his cyanosis work.
Yeah.
And so, based on the premise of that, he brought up your name. And then also, another mutual friend of ours, Gabrielle, she brought you up when I shared the idea with her on a couple of other projects and a little bit about like mental. She's like, yeah, you should. Do you know Karrington? I was like, no. So when I found out that we were in the same show Amaya curated over at Green Hill, I was like, oh,
Yeah.
great. So it was like a great time that we ran into each other. And so after our conversations, you talked about safe spaces, and I got a little bit more, and it just made sense to have you as a part of this show. And so my first question is, how does your work touch on the subject of mental health? I think it's better that you describe it than all of us kind of talk about it for you.
I feel that my work, when I was looking at it today, one thing that I definitely thought about was rest. My mother is very big on like you need to rest, no matter how much society says like you have to keep going, keep going. You have to have moments of rest. And I feel like in my work, even though it's like chaotic and has a lot of perspective shifts and like color shifts and whatnot, I like these little moments of rest where like the viewer can kind of go, okay, I'm good. Now let me get back to it. And that's something I literally practice in my life. Like if I feel that I'm getting too wound up with tasks and art projects and so on and so forth, I will literally go outside and walk and just like clear my mind with silence or just listen to the breeze or whatever and just have those moments of rest. I also feel like contextually the work talks about spaces and like what a safe, comfortable space could mean to somebody. And of course, speaking from a place of privilege, like not everybody has that, but what are those spaces that people can feel comfortable and safe in?
Yeah, I definitely see that. I mean, in particular, one of your pieces from the Barber series and another piece called Getting a Cut, I believe
Yeah,
is what it is.
yeah,
Yeah. So like the people depicted in that, there is a sense of calm that I get when I look at that. And just like even the whole practice of getting the hair cut, like you literally
mhm,
are just laying back, relaxing. It's almost a
yeah,
meditative experience.
yeah.
And then I find that interesting compared to like the other parts of your Barber series where there's no people, there's a sense of calmness even in that liminal space of a barber shop. So I
Mhm.
definitely see that. I read a little bit about about your thesis. I believe it was something you made at that you wrote when you were at UNCG.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, what 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 I took away from that was just the importance of having a space where Black men in particular can be safe and feel safe to be vulnerable,
Mhm.
to open up. And traditionally that's been a barber shop, but you know, it I started realizing I don't know of too many other spaces. And then I think in talking about your earlier works, it looks like you were
Mhm.
exploring like the power of space in general. So,
Yeah.
you know, I feel like it's a that particular topic is like a subtopic of a larger conversation.
Mhm.
It's specifically about like healing spaces, building space, and this sort of like claiming space. Can you expand on that? Well, really, what actually inspired you to do this work?
Honestly, I had a very existential moment in the studio one day. And I just realized like everything, well, majority, if not everything in our lives is a construct made to kind of aid in some type of narrative. Whether that's like our identity itself, racial hierarchies, or just honestly anything. Everything is curated to have some type of meaning, association, so on and so forth. So I thought about what are spaces that I curate to help me feel safe, make me feel the happiest, so on and so forth. And then what are spaces I might feel a little bit more uncomfortable in, or I might have to take out this part of me to be seen more, or what part do I kind of have to bring out more to be heard? Just think about like the nuance of human existence and how much you kind of have to change and shift, and how I wanted to show that in the spaces I was constructing.
Yeah, and also having an existential crisis, I think, is part of going through grad school. That
Yeah.
was that was
Yeah.
definitely me at
Yeah.
SCAD.
It was definitely one
um,
of those days.
yeah. Well, also, I think you mentioned that before of like not feel, well, can you expand on that a little bit more? Because I think you had
Yeah.
mentioned earlier about recognizing there wasn't a lot of spaces where people like us were in.
Honestly, so going back to like where I kind of got the inspiration, I grew up in predominantly Black spaces. Like the school I went to was predominantly Black. Of course, you had like some exchange students or like different ethnicities and cultures like kind of mixed in throughout. But I never had to question like, oh, I'm Black, or like really question that part of my identity. But I've also noticed as I go up in my education, the less of me that are in the room. So when I got to grad school, not that anyone necessarily made me feel isolated, but like when you look around and go, oh, I'm one of two, or I'm just the only one, it's kind of a strange experience. Because for some reason with Black people, we feel like we have to like overexert our Blackness or like really proclaim like I am Black, especially in like art spaces. It just felt like a weird pressure, like I have to make everything super pro-Black. Not that that's a problem, but like I feel like my Blackness would have shown up in the work regardless of like the subject matter. So that's also kind of where that came from. And like I said, no one made me feel uncomfortable about it, but it just really made me think like, what happens when we're in this space, and like what's the psychological process or mental process that kind of happens to us when we're not in predominantly Black spaces. And like I've mentioned before, code switching, like it'd be days where I'm like, ooh, I maybe shouldn't have said that, or like maybe I shouldn't have said it like this. Or like, did they understand what I was saying because I didn't use some like really big academic word, or just like it was like a bunch of mental gymnastics that no one necessarily put on me, but it's just weird when you're the only one in a space, or like one of few in a space, or at least in that program, I'll say.
Yeah, and I think it also, because you teach at A&T, so
Mhm.
I think you brought up before too about like this going back to curating a space. What I'm hearing is like this there's a sense of ownership and a reclamation in curating the space and making these intentional spaces for yourself.
Yeah.
And I know you just, well, it sounded like you started off from sort of an individualistic point of view, but I can also see it as being collective. I mean,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
anecdotally speaking, I think Black people in general, we tend to lean more collective. And
Yeah.
so, can you kind of share more about your experience sort of curating the spaces at A&T for your students? What has that been like?
Honestly, it's been a great transition, to be honest, because I went here 2017 to 2021. So like I kind of understood the culture and like how, I don't want to say how things were ran, but like, understood like how the professors and the students kind of worked to create what was the A&T, or what is the A&T visual art program. So when I got here and now I'm teaching the next generation of artists, I had to think like, what are things that I got while I was here that I want to pass on? And then what are things that I can add to it that I might not have gotten, so I can make their experience even better. So I think about like the way the classroom's set up. This year I was really big on interaction between students, especially because, after COVID, everybody's so separated. I was really big on like, no, you have to talk to your classmates. You need to understand who the people are in this room. So when we get to like critique, or if it's times where maybe I can't help a student, but maybe your classmate can help, it's easier when you know the people around you. And I will say I did a really good job of that. I literally saw two of the students that didn't know each other at the beginning of the semester. All of a sudden, they're best friends, like going everywhere together. So it was just really important to like curate a great environment where the students felt safe enough to learn, and then safe enough to like trust me through the process.
No, that's beautiful. I think earlier you mentioned before about like acknowledging the teachers before you that curated the
Yeah.
space when you're a student.
Mhm.
Um, that's actually what made me again think about this sort of collective ownership, and that's kind of where I was getting that. You
Mhm.
know, I think especially in terms of mental health, I spoke with Marion Tisdale, who I think you're also familiar with, and we had
Mhm.
talked about, because I think a lot of your work resonates with his.
Mhm.
I think because we were talking about having a space where people can heal, or what does healing look like. And
Yeah.
so combining those two ideas, your work definitely identifies that, especially around the barbershop. But this kind of makes me think about, what other spaces can we identify that is safe for Black men? Because like I find it's beautiful that Chapel Hill has a whole program called Barbershop, and it's like
Mhm.
this truck with barbers that are trained by mental health professionals to
Mhm.
then kind of act as like a surrogate therapist while cutting people's hair. And I thought that was absolutely brilliant. And also,
Yeah.
I think that's kind of proof in and of itself on how much of a cultural sort of safe space it is for a place of healing. But I would say, what do you think? Yeah, what would make more safe? What would making more safe spaces look like in that regard?
Like we were talking about earlier, they definitely have to be intentional. And like
Mm,
really think about, is it just for Black boys? Is it for Black boys and girls? Is it young or is it old? Like, is it a one-time thing where they then share the knowledge? Is it a reoccurring event where they then bring more people in? And I also think we were talking about like just places in general. Of course, you have churches, but then that depends on your relationship with religion and all that. Recreation centers, which just kind of came up in my mind because I know a lot of times when I was younger, I would go to recreation centers for like summer camps or like events, and that was a really big gathering place,
mhm.
especially in Columbia, South Carolina. It was just great to have like everyone together where it was like a MLK day or if it was like a I don't know, like a basketball tournament somebody was throwing. Those were really good places to just like enjoy people's company and feel safe for like a little bit of time. And then depending on, where you go afterwards, then you go back to reality. But definitely recreation centers. But to round it out, I think they just have to be intentional and like really think, who is this for?
I think that's a great point to end on that, and I
Yeah.
really appreciate it. I think that's, yeah, I think that sums it all up. Because like, yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge. It's not just access. It's just what building those intentional spaces, building on uh, places that you can reclaim,
Hmm.
and also having that discussion about, who is it for, and do we even need to exclude, or can it just be for people?
Yeah.
Anyway, those are my major takeaways from this, and so I appreciate you for your time
Yeah.
and attention.
Yeah. Anytime. Thank you for having me again.
Hello to everyone watching. My name is Jordan. I'm a curator for JTR Presents. I want to thank you in advance for watching this. I had the privilege and pleasure of getting to speak with Marion Tisdale the fourth here. Marion, thank you so very much for your time.
Much appreciated. Much appreciated. You're welcome.
Yeah, yeah. So, before we get started, a quick recap. So I have the pleasure of showcasing you and your work for this exhibit that's in partnership with Champ and Dawn on, especially around the topic and themes around mental health, particularly for men of color. And so when I thought about this, I spoke with William Paul Thomas, I spoke with Karrington, Gardner, Johan, Eskew, and I remember as I was talking mainly with William because of his work. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work,
Yeah, I know,
Cyanosis.
man. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so a lot. The first thing that came to my mind with this project was that conversation he and I had about the harmful effects and kind of like this sort of stigma within Black culture that we don't talk about our mental health. And I thought about you and our conversations before because I feel like you as an artist and just our time together since knowing each other, a lot of our conversations have talked about the intersections of Blackness and queerness in all the spaces that we occupy. And so it felt appropriate to bring you in on this project because the intersectionality that you speak on through your work, I think, is an important topic to bring in. Also, I remember we were talking about not just calling out the trauma, but also acknowledging the healing, which I see you doing in your work, especially with your latest piece that you wanted to showcase. And so, kind of before we get into all of that, I think I want to start with a simple question of, with the works that are in this exhibit, you know, how does your work touch on the subject of mental health?
So, well, thank you for that question. So, with all the pieces, and let me just make sure I have them all right. The ones that we have are Kwani, Eat of My Fruit, Niggas in Crisis Helpline, and then lastly, The Blood I've Shed to Love You. And so,
That is correct.
all of them, yes. And so, all of them came from very different times, and all except one of them on some level were inspired by rage. Kwani came specifically from a lot of my journey. I've lived in Raleigh for almost 30 years at this point. I have been homeless twice. And a lot of the times, and growing up in a neighborhood like College Park, which is where I grew up, shout out to St. Aug, I've essentially watched that neighborhood be eaten alive. And while that is happening, there's also this constant hyper-criminalization of the Black people who live there and hyper-surveillance to the point where even the neighborhood I live now, out by Carnage, is facing that same thing. And no one talks about the idea of someone, even if it's not the best neighborhood, living for in its place for almost 20, 30 years. And then because other places around you are selling, falling apart, property tax, now you have to uproot. And on top of that, you can't fight it because unfortunately, 9 times out of 10, we don't own the houses that we're living in. And Kwani was really to put a face to the fact that like that does still sting. No one like we talk about gentrification, but if you ain't never cried in a moving truck, I don't want to hear your conversation on it respectfully. Because you're not the ones who've actually dealt with it. It's always other people speculating on it. And I really wanted Kwani to be dedicated to that feeling of loneliness and sadness even. And this part about it was I also wanted it to be a humanity with him. And one of my favorite parts on that illustration is his little tattoo that says Kiki. And when that piece was first displayed at Winston-Salem, one of the guards at the museum, Sam, he came up to me and said, "So is he like in love?" And I said, "Maybe." But the importance of that tattoo was to show he had been loved. And we don't talk about the humanizing of people in these situations. So then we look at a piece like Eat of My Fruit. And that was to let go of a lot of anger in regards to the ways in which I treated going to school. Now, high school Marion was very deep in the closet, but also me being me, gorgeous. So there would unfortunately be times where at this PWI, due to stereotype and hypersexualization, where I at times would be asked about my size, and we'll put it as the nicest term in that way. And the thing about it that always had me messed up is anytime I protested it, it would be treated as if I was in the wrong. As if, well, isn't it a compliment that we think it's big? Isn't it a compliment that we would think of you in this way? And I'm sitting here like, I don't want you to sexualize me. So it's not a compliment because I'm not giving you consent to think of me like that. And then the fact of the matter is, looking back at the history of enslavement, the ways in which Black women's entire reproductive system has been made to be monetized, the fact that we were literally being birthed like animals, when you say something like that, you're not saying it in a term of like, you're so beautiful. You're saying in a term of you are property made to produce. And I needed to make a piece that puts someone for that anger to go because no one talks about Black boys who are dealing with being fetishized on a level like that. And then because of toxic masculinity, you're taught, well, you should like it. And then we get to Niggas in Crisis Helpline. And it actually ended up not being my first solo exhibition, but it was a piece I made after it. And that was from my series called Wound. And that came from some very important conversations I had while I was at Morehouse. I am a Morehouse grad in 2021. And I remember one day there's this crazy storm that blew through. I think it was like Hurricane Irma. It was one of them hurricanes with a country name. And so class was canceled because they're like, we don't want to risk the commuters driving in the storm. It was like an insane storm. Like you walked outside, it was a wall of wind, water, and cold. no one wanted to go outside if you could help it. Yeah, it was Atlanta be having some storms. You forget she on the coast, low key. Like, yeah.
I went to SCAD for grad school, and I remember a couple storms. I was like, whoa,
Crazy,
okay,
right?
that's what we
Right.
have out here.
Reminds you of Raleigh a little bit, right? Right.
Worse. I feel like it's
So
worse. Yeah.
Raleigh, the thing with them is they're not consistent. So I can deal with a storm if it's predictable. I'm also from Indiana, so a crazy storm don't stop me from nothing. I grew up, I've had tornadoes fly by me. Like that's where my country tends to come from. Um,
Mm.
but going back to that day, and I remember like everyone was just chilling, playing video games, eating food, da, 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 da. It's like 3 in the morning. Um, and we'll call those like sad boy hours. Like if you're out with people, it's 3 a.m. The conversation is gonna be really funny or it's gonna be real, usually. And so while sitting there, while talking, and we just all started like opening up with each other. We all been cool with each other. It's been a couple of months. We're all literally stepping to adulthood, this and the third. So there's like this kind of like agreed upon safety that this is not going to be a space of necessary judgment. And so we open up. We open up about the fact that some of us have dealt with sexual abuse and not even just, the traditional sense, but also the ways in which a lot of Black men are sexually abused, where an older woman will prey upon them. And then instead of that being persecuted or seen as destructive or disgusting, they're praised for being assaulted, but not held necessarily. There was one dude who talked about how he's been dealing with a lot of anger just for years because he grew up with his father in the prison system. He's like, I've been a man since I was 12. And we don't talk about that rage, that not even necessarily rage, that like unrest a lot of us had. And for the first time for a lot of us, it was the first time we could say that and not feel like we were the only ones that were dealing with it. I remember after we all opened up, some had shed tears, some were just, in shock. And there was just a silence that fell, a very quiet, hard silence. It wasn't like anything was bad, but it was like everyone's coming to the idea that we are not necessarily alone in these things. And the thing is, I don't even talk to a lot of those dudes still. Like, I don't talk to a lot of them, unfortunately. You grow up, you go live life, and COVID messed up contact with everything. But I still think about how deeply that conversation affected me. And I hope on some level it gave them healing, but it shouldn't take going all the way to college for you to feel that safety. And so that's where wound comes from and niggas in crisis comes from. Because there is a crisis that's constantly silenced. And specifically the piece that you chose, the one where he's on the phone, is actually one of my favorites because all the other ones in the wound series, still Billy and Bruce, he's the only one actively trying to fix it. He is the only one actively reaching out. So it's very interesting that was the one that you chose.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of hitting me fresh. I was gonna I just want to take a moment to appreciate because you already partially answered the next question I had, which was like, what inspires your work as a whole? And I think just tying it back to what you said, starting from a place of rage. And I think this is what I mean when I think about your work is like calling out the injustices, but also your recent work is starting to really call out for the healing aspect. And we can get to
I think
that
it's
in a
breaking up a
moment.
little bit.
Uh-oh. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So
It's like lagging. I think she's putting it back together. Yeah.
okay, cool. I think we're back.
Yeah.
With Niggas in Crisis hotline, where the individual's the only one like reaching out for help. I feel like that's kind of a transition into your latest work that I want to make room to kind of talk about. Which I think you, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think you said it's The Blood That I Shed to Love You.
The blood that I shed to love you.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's so profound. Before we get into it, I think it's important to bring up, like I think you mentioned before about talking about the need for brotherhood is sometimes like we have to talk about how we need to, I think it was steward our fellow brothers and not just whenever they are wilding out, we should probably ask the question as to why versus well, boys will be boys kind of situation. At least that's how I understood it.
Yeah, well, because I mean, that's the thing of it. Like we, as a community, we're very like you see something weird, but you don't say anything. And I think part of that also comes with the fact that for years we were very hyper police, and just even sitting in an area not looking put together can get you thrown in jail. So at times I feel like at times with us, like the idea of calling out someone's mental health, I think kind of triggers this question of, am I putting this person in danger because of it? But then we also have to talk about the fact that that person's already in danger. And it becomes this very slippery slope of how do we navigate it and all these other things about how like quickly it is that you go into a space for mental health. You might say something wrong. You might say, or because you are a black man, if you say something that's a little bit more sharp or has a little foul language, well, you're belligerent and you're violent and you're dangerous now. And now instead of you just getting the help that you needed, you're now have a target on your back. And it happens all the time to black children who are diagnosed with ADHD. Very quickly, they'll unfortunately will fall down a cycle of violence and fighting because the school will almost pit them like that. Like that's the only thing you afford. They won't work with them. And it's becoming this constant thing where yes I'm angry, yes I'm disappointing you, but also what broke you, because that's kind of the thing. It's this. I mean, I even think back to like Gucci Man, the book that he just released, like being a black man with schizophrenia, and how because you're kind of pressured to be like this aggravated confrontational person, a lot of people will ignore those signs and ignore those traumas. And unfortunately, for a very long time, it led to a lot of loss in his life. And I'm happy that it's getting back to it, but it then begs the question, how much bigger of a scale is this? And then we also have to talk about the fact that health issues like schizophrenia have a very long, dark, and racist history. I'm gonna put it like this. If a dog bit you, that dog is more scared of you than you are of it. And so when we come to this discussion about Black men and mental health, Black men and anger, Black queerness and mental health, and Black queerness and anger, we also have to remember that a lot of Black queer young men go through a space in their friendships and their communities where they're essentially abandoned and left alone. I mean, think about like all the male best friends you had up until third grade. And then when you start to show your feminine affectations, how they switched up. Because they went from being your friends to now being your persecutors and the people who are watching you. And all that kind of sits with this dog. And I really wanted there to be the discussion of having to navigate that loneliness and pain. And so that even goes to another character on there, who is like, maybe 13, 14. And if you look in his hand, it has a little like schoolyard note in it that says, "Do you like me? Check yes or no." And unfortunately, the kid holding it, it's obviously scratched out to hell saying no. It even has the word ill written on it. But he's sitting there bloodied and bruised. And there's also a discussion to be had that the idea of navigating adolescence normally as a young black queer man is already taken from me. Because I wasn't going on dates in high school. I didn't have my first date till I was in college. And even then, I wasn't in a space where I could tell my parents about my first date. I remember talking to my straight friend Dave, who for some reason was just in the room. But I was like, I'm trying not to be angry, but I was like, I don't see the big deal. My parents are terrible. I'm like, yeah, but they didn't shame you for wanting to be loved. And that all leads to the idea of the ways in which I arrange the pieces. And if you look at, the top two characters who are like below this couple that's in love, one, they're the most femme presenting because not to be too crass, it takes balls to decide to be feminine, black, queer, and young. And we forget a lot of times that the femmes are the ones holding up this community by its edges a lot of the time. But I also made it so that they were the only ones looking up with hope. And I did that because at the end of this, when you reach some level of autonomy, when you reach the idea of being who you are, there is a divine beauty in that almost doesn't even have words. And considering the fact that I've made so many pieces discussing Black men's mental health and we've been bloody, and we've been bruised, and sure they've called up for help, I haven't made many pieces dedicated to the hope you have to survive it. On how that hope is a very radical thing to have. And it's unapologetically beautiful. So on top of it being like a piece that I'm very excited to, because at the time it's not finished, so no shade. To finish, there's also a piece that might end up being one of my favorites because instead of going the right of the horrific or the aggravated, I went the right of hopeful. And I wanted the name itself to really encapsulate that because there is not necessarily bloodshed, but there is a metamorphosis that is going to hurt that you have to go through to be a queer black man who is comfortable in themselves. And not just queer black men, queer mass in general, who is comfortable in themselves. And even now with my own dating, I'm still dealing with people who are like, I don't do femmes. And I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. It brings me back to the idea of like, you're broken, what broke you, and woo woo woo. But also, are you going to have that conversation? And why is it that you have to perform these things? And I say I
Right.
like to say that that's really where this piece really came to a lot of conversations that I am constantly having with other people and also with myself. Because like even as sweet as your compliment was about like my hair for the first time, this even my hair, like it being colorful and changing it and the braids and the twists and the locks and this and the third, that was my own like transition into it. It's really accepting myself because I had to kind of learn that to have a little bit of tough skin. I remember the first time I wore box braids and I decided the beats were going to be like a pastel rainbow. And like I'm chilling, group of teenagers come up to me, which, honey, if you're young, if you are an adult and you are queer, and a pack of teenagers come up to you, you're either going to get roasted or told you look amazing. I got both. Because one say your hair is like really, really
Won't they
nice,
do it?
and right, and walked away. And as I walk on, one of the boys, "Are you gay?" Like in the background screaming it, and I'm sitting here like, okay, I could say something smart back because how do I put this? I'm a fairy that used to fight. That even goes back to the other piece in the show, the fight of the fairies. Um, but I didn't necessarily want to start anything, so I just walked away. But like this constant you're constantly put to the test on how much you love yourself and is that enough to kind of break through the ways in which other people perceive you. Because I easily could have turned around and said, well, all y'all wearing hats and hoodies that are stained. So we could start there. But because I'm trying to practice peace and not necessarily retaliate, I just chose to keep to myself. But that did remind me even of Fight of the Fairies, which talked about the fact that even while I was in college, stepping to my own femininity in this group of friends who I still love to death and I wish them the best, when it came to stepping into our identities, we were literally full on physically fighting because we didn't want to be the most feminine in the group. The gag is half of us are
Mm,
non-binary now, but
wow.
the fact of the matter is there are memories I have of literally like trying to actively how do I put this? Trying to literally beat the femininity out of my friend while proving I didn't have any, and vice versa.
Mm, mm.
And so when it comes to the blood I have shed to love you, it goes to all of that. And it's really felt like a piece that has allowed me to let go of some of that anger, but also invite other, just any young queer person, young queer black person, to kind of take a seat and know that there are others who have come before you, there are others who have survived it, and there are ancestors who are rooting for you. I am rooting for you.
And I as well. I don't have anything else to say. I just kind of want to sit in that. I think it's best. So with that, I thank you so much for this. And I just want to
Much
sit in that
appreciated.
peace. Hello, everyone. For those who are watching, welcome. My name is Jordan. I am a curator for JTR Presents, and I have the privilege and pleasure of talking with William Paul Thomas. William, thank you so very much for being here. How are you holding up today?
Thanks for chatting with me, Jordan. I'm doing pretty well. It's a good day. It's warm outside. It's sunny, so I'm feeling pretty good.
Good, good. So, without further ado, I kind of want to get right into it. This is a conversation I'd like to have with you, if you will, over this exhibit, Dual Diagnosis. It's in partnership with several organizations and particularly around mental health. And so once I was approached and was asked to curate this exhibition, and the theme was to keep it around mental health, particularly for men of color and Black men.
And I immediately thought of you. I thought about our meeting. I forgot how long ago it was. You were in a show at the Nasher, and they had this huge exhibit, and I knew like half the artists there. And your cyanosis series took up like this whole wall. And I remember us having kind of an impromptu, like, recorded session for something that you were doing on your platforms around mental health, and particularly like Black men being able to open up and like express that they need help, or express the stressors that they experience and affect their mental health is what I understood. And so from that angle, I see your work, that series, speaking on this exhibit, but I kind of wanted to hear it from you and go in a deeper dive. So how does your work, particularly in cyanosis, how does that touch on the subject of mental health from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you. So I was really grateful for the opportunity that we had to have that conversation back in, I think 2022 was when that Reckoning and Resilience show at the Nasher was. So I've been having lots of reflective conversations about this series over the years. And one thing I sometimes have to remind myself of, or a realization that I've had, is that a lot of the work that I've made over the years, even when it starts out as this kind of external reflection or external observation, tends to stem from my own personal experiences, even when I haven't really identified that from the start. So I think cyanosis is like that, where I know that I have grown up with family and friends and a community that I don't always take advantage of the opportunity to dialogue with them about what I got going on, to talk with people, to share, to express. And so I think these series of paintings where men have their faces painted half blue initially started off as a way of me asking the viewer, where I would share these works, to sort of consider these men not just like their likenesses, but something was off about their likenesses, so that the fact that their faces were painted half blue, I hope would prompt the question for the viewers to question, why would someone's face be blue? So whether it's like it's turning blue or the blue is dissipating, however you see it, and considering that they're all Black men and boys, it was a way of introducing this element of questioning what's happening without me having to be there for the question to be asked. So I have a long history of painting portraits of people, tending to emphasize just their natural skin color, as it is in the photo reference that I take of them. And I realized for those years just painting these sort of naturalistic portraits that often I'd have these really deep, meaningful conversations about race, about the portrait subject, but that was when I was present. And so I had this dilemma of, how do I ask these questions about how we see the subjects in these paintings without me always having to be standing there to talk to the people that are looking at the paintings? So my sort of solution to that was to introduce this feature of changing the color. And in my mind, although blue has all these kind of myriad associations with it, the first thing that occurred to me with the first painting I made, it was of my nephew Michael, and his face is the top half of his face was painted this bluish color, but it was more of a gray blue, kind of almost like a deadening of his skin. And so right away the start of the series became this thought about how much does this conversation about race, or this experience about race, sort of flatten one's experience in the world, to where race becomes so much topic of discussion that we ignore other aspects of the person's identity, right? So when I'm sharing a portrait of Mikey somewhere, especially a place that might be predominantly white, I think from my experience talking to some of the viewers, there's so much emphasis on him being this beautiful little Black boy, and really kind, thoughtful reflections, when people talk to me out loud about what they see in him. But I think I personally have this preoccupation with wondering if what I was hearing was this sort of separating Mikey from just the human experience. Like, yeah, he's this beautiful black boy. I'm seeing, some of the thoughtfulness or the depth in represented in his eyes. But I think what I would, maybe this could be totally a projection, was that the viewers were tending to sort of not think of him as a whole person, like that his experience of being this little black boy, that there was only a certain amount of um how do you say, mirroring that they might experience, in terms of thinking that their emotional experiences or life experiences could be reflected in this kid. And so my experience is, one of the really critical moments in my life, or like a critical turning point, was when I moved from Chicago, Illinois to Beloit, Wisconsin when I was 11 years old. And in Chicago, my community was predominantly black. So my church family, my peers at school, the white people that I interacted with the most were like the teachers. I went to a Catholic school, so like the clergy that taught classes, that was the most time I spent around like white folks. But when I moved to Beloit, now I was a minority, right? And so I think that turning point in my life has made me sort of hyper focus on what it means to be a black man, a black boy in spaces, in any space, but particularly if I'm a minority, or and it's a majority white um, environment. I'm wonder how I'm perceived, and I also feel maybe unsafe, or I feel uncertain about if I belong in those places. And so using these portraits as a way of kind of like pointing to the unspoken experiences that we have of showing up in all the places that we do in the world, and having these internal thoughts, feelings, experiences that we might not often get to say out loud, because it might not be, maybe we think it won't be welcome. We don't know if people can handle the experiences that we have to share. We maybe don't even know how to fully articulate, what we're experiencing. But if you would just pay attention, if you could ask folks to pay attention to the sort of natural sort of complexion, but now introducing this aberration, how might it ask you to sort of like stop and pause and consider like why that might be happening? So it became like a way of like introducing this metaphor of everybody that you encounter, black men included, is dealing with some internal thing that they may or may not ever like say to you out loud. And what does it mean to sort of consider that when you interact with humans? Period, is to know that yes, you'll meet people that are gregarious, smiling, happy, confident, and all of those positive traits that people might have doesn't necessarily negate the fact that they have like some internal experiences that complicate their lives.
Great, that's rich. You definitely answered my next question. So I kind of want to do a slight pivot from it. The next question was going to be what inspired you to make this work in particular. And so I'd like to pivot by saying, what direction is your work taking you now?
Ancestry. I'm obsessed with finding out things about my roots, my immediate family, our history. And I have a daughter, I have a 4-year-old daughter, and I was really inspired by the fact, this realization, once I finally had a child, that my daughter is the product of two people that have led two very different lives. And that she inherits that in so many different ways, not just genetically, but socially, environmentally. She's a product of us. And I think when that clicked for me, us having her, I start paying attention to it for myself and for everybody. Is that like, what does that mean to sort of be a child of two parents that have led two different lives, and now you're the embodiment of that, that combination, that meeting, between those two people, for better or for worse, or not even better or worse, just like the complexity of that, the depth of that is really fascinating to me. So I'm in the middle of processing all of these things, both like finding family records related to my own family history, but also just having lots of conversation with family members to kind of unpack like who we are and how we got to where we are.
And that's kind of where my ending thoughts are. And so I know we can keep going on. I meant to try to keep this short, and I sincerely appreciate it. I guess what are your final thoughts around this topic, especially around like the need for us to not be silent about our mental health? Maybe that's a good place to end on.
But thank you. I feel like there's a looming question for me right now about like what does it mean to share as much information as we can about what we have going on internally and still feel like we are protecting whatever sense of safety and privacy that we need, right? Like, so how do we find these safe spaces to talk to have hard conversations, and not just with our therapists, right? For those of us that have therapists, like I've recently been having tough conversation with family members and wondering like if all of us are seeking out the opportunity to dialogue with family about with hard topics. And so I think that's my question, my unanswered question is related to the importance of having a dialogue with our loved ones about the things that are hard to discuss. I think that's a really critical question to present to that I'm grappling with, and that I would present to anyone listening to our conversation is, can you find that space? Do you need to find that space? And what do you need to do to release and to still fully own your story, but find a place to have an outlet to dialogue about the things that are important to you?
Thank you for that. I do feel the need to also add on to that because I often hear about, at least from my anecdotal experience, there's stigma and sort of internalized trauma or stigma against being open and vulnerable and seeking help. I also think it's important to acknowledge the access people have, because I think like what you said, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like I think you said like even affording a therapist. And so that just made me think about, in many ways, it's still considered a privilege to even afford a therapist. And I think that can also be a barrier that keeps people from opening up and discussing or having the hard conversations. And so what you're talking about, these alternative ways to still provide that opening, I think I feel the need to share like the challenge of access also kind of further flavors that dynamic a little bit.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So again, thank you so much for what you do and the work that you're doing. I can't wait to see more. I kind of want to do a shout out because I think you're doing something at Ackland, was it?
At the Horace Williams house. So that's actually where we're recording right now. So June 6th, next Saturday, it'll open from 2 to 4 will be the reception, and then it'll be up from June to July. Horace Williams house in Chapel Hill.
All right, Horace Williams house in Chapel Hill. I'll make sure to visit this summer. Thank you so very much.
All right. Thank you so much, Jordan.